Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Atlanta Bound by Lilith Saintcrow, narrated by Erin Deward. Supportive. Before the world ended, it generally took 4 to 6 hours between Cincinnati and Cleveland, depending on traffic. Now it took 2 days, even though Lake Erie hadn't frozen yet, and the snow cleared enough they had to take the chains off both Lee's battered red truck and Juju Thurgood's black 4x4. Empty cars scattered everywhere. Everyone had tried to get out of town, and road clearing had fallen further and further down the emergency services priority list. No few of the abandoned vehicles had a door or two hanging open or windows starred with breakage. If you were in a car with a sicken when the convulsions hit, it probably got confusing right quick. Or, if, God forbid, you had a loved one pass the convulsions and that awful, gripping growl started, and what was now a hungry corpse lunged for the closest victim, Lee Quartine figured a body would want to get out of a car right quick if that happened, and not be too choosy about the escape direction, so to speak. On the first afternoon out of Cincinnati, raw gray chill roughened the iron-pan sky, billows heavy with precipitation refusing to drop just yet. Crashes clogged the road arteries, and just outside Columbus was a snarl of deserted checkpoints, most with bullet holes chewed through thin plywood walls, holes they added to when they stopped. "That's right," Lee murmured, wishing he had a baseball cap to shade his eyes, not to mention cover up how long his hair was getting. He kept his tone soft, level, conversational. Some people needed a bark or two to keep their mind on the task at hand, but not her. "Now, breathe out, and in the middle, squeeze, don't pull." Ginny Mills did her best. The gun barked, the recoil went all the way up her shaking arms, and if Lee hadn't been bracing her, the pistol probably would have flown backward and clocked her a good one. Well, maybe not. But in any case, she couldn't help but clap her eyes shut each time she got off a shot. As a result, the bullets went wide, real wide. And each time, she lowered the gun instead of tracking, frowning a little and biting her soft lower lip. Traveler in the truck with both windows rolled a third of the way down, yip-howled unhappily. The blue-tick coonhound plain hated being put inside and told to stay, but Lee didn't want him pulling on a leash while someone was aiming, or, God forbid, going down range. Young Steph Meacham took a bead next, concentrating so hard her feathery eyebrows almost met in the middle. She had a good stance, nice and braced, and hit what she was aiming at more often than not. Once, twice, thrice, a neat little grouping of holes exploded in the side of a plywood shack set in the left lane ahead of them. Each time a gun went off, Ginny flinched. There was just no way around it. Cold wind riffled stray chestnut curls escaping from her black knit cap. Lee stood behind her, his arms on either side of hers, walking her through the motions of checking the gun. "How many shots you got left?" 13. Ginny's teeth all but chattered. Lean black Juju Thurgood was coaching staff, beak-nosed Mark Kasprick leaning in to listen with his big gloved hands dangling. Next time they stopped, it would be Mark shooting and Steph observing, and Kasprick had a good steady hand with a pistol, better with a rifle. They were both coming along right well. Ginny was a different story. "You get used to it," Lee said. If there hadn't been firearms involved, he would have downright enjoyed being so close. Bracing her and teaching her to deal with the recoil had its pleasant parts. "Don't worry." "I am worried." She lowered the pistol even further, index finger locked conscientiously outside the trigger guard. "I've got to get this down." "Well, you're doing all right, far as I can tell." Lee couldn't hope for a better student. She took every safety measure to heart and didn't do a damn thing he didn't tell her specifically to. If only more of the asshole kids coming through basic had been half as careful. Steph squeezed off another shot, putting a hole neatly in the middle of a sign saying, "Turn off your lights." "You see that?" Mark crowed, hopping in place. "Damn, girl!"
"Mama always said girls are good shots. Said it was hand-eye coordination."
Steph blinked owlishly, her face smoothing out.
"Your turn now, Miss Ginny."
"I'd rather not." But Ginny gamely lifted the piece again, and Lee stepped back to give her room this time. "Keep your arms straight," Juju said. "I don't like guns," Ginny said through gritted teeth for the 50th time, and blam! Muzzle flash. This time she actually hit the checkpoint, about shoulder height on the plywood. Oh, yeah! Mark cheered, pumping his fist in the air. "Now that's what I'm talking about."
"You're such a dork,"
Steph said, but gently. She wasn't keeping her distance from the boy anymore, but something had sure enough changed between them. Puppy love grew just like puppies did, maybe. "I'm being supportive," the boy popped back with a grin. He was filling out his expensive new parka with a vengeance now. Traveler agreed with him. "Check your clips, Steph." Juju squinted, glancing down the freeway. They could get past on the shoulder here, but a crash near the checkpoint had involved fire. Twisted metal corpses stood silent sentinel, charred and dripping with melt. "Coming up on 15, Lee." "Yeah." Lee checked his half of their surroundings, a modesty screen of wind-torn bushes, an embankment full of yellowed winter grass and patches of slush crowned with a high fence and the back end of a mini-mall. "Ginny, check and clear now." "Okay." Her fingers trembled visibly. Still, she popped the clip out and checked the chamber, carefully pointing the business end away from Juju and the kids. A high, pretty flush stood out on her cheeks, and her dark eyes were still and liquid with concentration. Like that? Just like that. He didn't miss her sigh of relief when she surrendered the gun, or her almost flinch when he clipped it again and holstered. "You're doing all right, Ginny. Learning just fine." Great. She bit at her lower lip again, and he was powerfully aware that she'd moved her sleeping bag closer to his last night. He kept meaning to stay awake and listen to her breathing, but as soon as the light was off, he was too, just like the damn dog. It was the best sleep of his life, never mind the cold office floors. If she curled up next to him again, he'd probably snore until spring. At least she'd stopped saying sorry each time she pulled the trigger. That was progress. Steph said, and pointed ahead past the abandoned checkpoint, the wrecks, and another thin dribble of abandoned cars.
"Mr. Thurgood?"
Juju glanced the way she was looking, and his face hardened, full lips compressing. "Get on in the 4x, kids. Lee." He saw it, too. Shuffling down the middle of the highway, blundering between wrecked cars, its head cocked at that queer angle, and its eyes filmy gray. A walking corpse in tattered desert camouflage dragged its boots along. So far, there was just the one. That was why the practice stops were only 15 minutes long. The noise inevitably drew shuffling, chewing, dead-eyed critters. "Pack it up," Lee said. "Next stop's t'other side of the city. We'll find food and more ammo." Always, always they looked for more ammo. "I'm not that bad a shot." Ginny edged for the truck. Her dark eyes were wide, and Traveler's yodeling took on a sharper edge. Lee caught another flicker of motion between the back of the mini-mall and a sagging chain-link fence. "Rather have it and not need it, darling." "Darling," Mark mouthed, and Steph giggled, elbowing him as she lengthened her coltish stride. Inside the truck, Ginny held Traveler's collar and soothed him, petting behind his ears while Lee twisted the key. Juju had scouted a way around this checkpoint when they stopped, so now he took it, the 4x's tires crunching on wet shoulder gravel, sinking a bit in the freezing mud before hauling along. Lee followed along, nosing the truck carefully through the tangle. All told, it wasn't a bad morning. Darling. The red Chevy rattled and Ginny jolted into wakefulness. She just couldn't seem to get enough sleep, though she passed out each night despite the discomfort of sleeping bags, foam pads, and cold. It was probably just the recovery from her bout with the flu, and thank goodness it hadn't been the flu, the one that turned everyone into, well, zombies was the word the kids used, and she might as well. It was certainly a more efficient term than shuffling, chewing, groan-grinding corpses. If they weren't dead, they were certainly close. Higher brain function seemed to be gone. The only thing that remained was the imperative to bite and the hunt for, well, they were no doubt looking for food. The thought of maybe turning into one of those brainless, foot-dragging things sent a chill down her back even now. She was lucky. How long until luck ran out? For her, or for someone else in their little group. It's all right, Lee said quietly, the same way he did every time she startled out of a nap. He gazed out the windshield, a clean-cut profile. She's looking for a place to spend the night. Her mouth tasted like morning all over again. Hopefully she hadn't been snoring. She wiped at her chin. No drool. That was a blessing. I hear Ohio hotels are good. She stretched her arms, then her legs, careful not to dislodge Traveler. The dog preferred to nestle between them on the bench seat, but Lee had suggested Ginny sit in the middle so she could lean on a shoulder instead of the window. Easier to sleep that way. It was a logical idea. And a nice one, too. So far, he was the same steady, quiet man he'd been since Cotton Crossing, even if she was sleeping in the same room with him when their stops permitted. It wasn't like she expected him to change, but you never could tell with guys. Might stop in one, or another grocery store. He didn't quite squint, but his gaze sharpened. His sandy, darkish hair was growing out and curling a little, stubbornly, and it suited him, along with the 5 o'clock shadow. Back in the Crossing, her private nickname for him had been Military Felon, and now she felt a little guilty about it. It wasn't a nice thing to call someone who had yanked you out of gunfire and beaten off your zombified neighbor, or someone who had climbed outside a 5th-story window and busted a glass door to help you, or someone you'd held in a darkened office kitchen and whispered there was nothing you could do, to, while he shook with dry, suppressed, silent sobs. If there was an etiquette manual for these situations, she'd missed when they were handing it out. The sky had turned ugly gray and infinite, clouds smoothing out. It looked like more snow, and Lee's window rolled down just a little, though the heat was on, breathed a cold metallic tang into the truck's cab. It wasn't cold, but she shivered anyway. It's going to snow, most likely. Have to chain up again. He glanced at her. How you feeling? That was something else he asked every time. Her mouth was rancid, her neck hurt, and dear God, she wanted a salad. Maybe if they stopped at a grocery store, she could try to find some unspoiled produce. Carrots. Maybe some apples that hadn't gone mushy. Fine. Are we stopping to shoot again? Not until tomorrow. The truck slowed, edging past a pileup in the right lane. Lee's hands were raw and reddening. She had to find him some good lotion when they stopped in a place likely to have some. No more shooting today. Relief filled her chest. Great. He smiled, and it did good things for his face as well. People got a lot more attractive when you liked them. There were all sorts of studies proving it. How many scientists had been lost when the sickness swept the world? Well, she had lasted a few minutes without a hideous thump in her stomach when she realized one more awful thing about current events. It was a new record. At least they were getting closer to New York. If this was a normal trip home, she'd generally have a hotel room planned somewhere just before Cleveland so she could handle Buffalo and the tolls afterward while she was relatively fresh. Or she'd have taken the train, and Dad would have picked her up in Albany. Flying home had become ridiculous ever since they added all the security theater. God. Imagine someone sick on a flight, going into seizures in a pressurized aluminum tube at 30,000 feet. Another horrible thought. Like clockwork. They wouldn't stop while she was awake, but at least she wasn't remembering her dreams. They were probably real creature features by now. Ginny bent, restless, rummaging in the footwell on the passenger side for her purse and the 2 books, a relatively recent Merck manual and an early volume of Foxfire. One for trying to figure out what this illness was, and the other for rebuilding. If they survived. The closer New York and her family got, the faster she wanted to be going, and the more uncomfortable thoughts rose. Her sister had probably gone into labor by now. Well, women had been giving birth for millennia. Flo should be okay. There were retired doctors all over the gated community her parents had retired to. Gated meant safe, right? But Mom and Dad were elderly. Hopefully they were all riding this out. If Ginny was immune, if what she'd had was only the regular flu, then hopefully they should be immune too, or at least halfway. And Flo and her baby, or maybe only one of her parents had immunity. She was still bruised all over, high fever, febrile conversions. If it hadn't been the zombie flu, it was like it, even if Juju had stories about soldiers and stress-triggered illnesses. Lee? There was a bruise on the inside of her right arm that looked for all the world like a needle had gone in. But that was ridiculous. Nobody had injected her with anything. She must have done something to herself when the fever spiked. She had a hazy memory of Lee breaking into her hotel room and holding her down as the seizures hit again, and the layers of bruises all over her were from throwing herself all over said room. Nothing, she said, finally, opening the Merck manual again. Tissue-thin pages carrying a civilization's cargo of medical knowledge, more precious now than ever. I'm just a little weirded out. Be strange if you wasn't, darling. One half of his mouth curled up and he ducked his head a little, a shy movement from the boy he must have been. He was probably quiet then, too. Darling. It sounded different when he said it, and it wasn't just his accent. She tried to imagine bringing him home to meet Mom and Dad. In the normal course of things, would he have talked to her before she finally got an offer and left for a bigger city, a bigger library system? Would she have seen the steadiness in him, the calm, or any of 100 other things she was now taking for granted, outright relying on? A goy, Mom would say to her friends, looking to the sky to witness her eldest daughter's latest not quite measuring up. He's very handy, though. Dad would like Lee. He respected competence. Her mother's disdain was somewhat expected, but her father's would be harder to bear if it happened. Flo, of course, would take one look at him and decide Ginny was going way below the Mills pay grade. It might even make her sister stop blaming her for the great soon-to-be ex-husband debacle. None of that would matter if they were alive and well. She could even put up with her mother's anxiety with good grace. Mom would probably go into a tizzy about how Ginny shouldn't have traveled, fussing and fretting. That would even be welcome because her mother never panicked during the emergency, only when things were settled and there was spare time for thinking about it. Please let them be all right, she thought again. Please, please let them be all right. She bent over the book, blinking against a sudden swell of hot water, and a few thin hard flakes of snow hit the windshield with soft, pop-slithering kisses. If you're gonna. They stopped just off the freeway at a fancy grocery store, all natural and organic plastered on every shelf. The glass doors in front were boarded up by some punctilious manager, and the parking lot held only 2 abandoned SUVs, standing lonely sentinel at either end. Rattling bits of snow came down, more ice than flake, and Juju didn't like the way the wind smelled of cold iron and heavy moisture on the way. He also didn't like the way Mark kept sidling after him, the kid's beaky face full of something, like he was congested with a secret and just had to share. Nothing good ever came from a white boy following you with something on his mind, and that was a fact. It was beginning to get damn eerie, being in deserted grocery stores. At least this one didn't have a goddamn zombie hiding behind the meat counter. The side door Lee and Juju chose had been jimmied once inexpertly, but whoever came through had left little trace except in the paper aisle, where someone had cleaned out a whole stand of recycled paper asswipe. Why they bothered, Juju had no idea. Recycled meant rough. And after the army, he had no desire to ever scrape his nethers with substandard tissue ever again. Tip had laughed at him for being serious over TP, but he also used Juju's luxury butt scrub with abandon. Well, Tip was past the problem of finding something to wipe with. He was past all the problems. Forever. Juju stopped next to a display of biodegradable cleaning supplies, rubbed at his eyes, and continued on. As if good old Clorox wasn't good enough for rich folk. Damn it all. It was in the soup aisle, both of them looking for dinner, that Mark finally busted. "Mr. Thurgood, sir." "Spit it out." Juju peered at the shelf in front of him. Tomato bisque, what the hell was that? There wasn't a decent can of Campbell's Chunky in the entire place. "Whatever you been sitting on, Casbrick, just let it loose." The boy's ungloved hands dangled. He was growing into them and filling out around the shoulders. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Thurgood, and I'm gonna give it." The words came out in a rush, and Mark hunched a little, as if expecting Juju to yell. What?" "What for, son?" Juju's flashlight flicked over cartons of beef stock, chicken stock, pasture-raised organic feed. Yes, sir, they were definitely in Yankee land now. "Mr. French, when he called you, when he did what he did, I should have said something I didn't, and I'm sorry." Mark didn't quite mumble, but he didn't raise his voice either. Well now, the world was still a surprising place. "Ain't nothing you could have said," Juju answered finally, even though Steph had spoken up. Still, if French had wanted to push it, neither of the kids would have been worth a red snoot. "Get yourself some food." Whatever Mark was expecting, it wasn't that. "I should have said something," he repeated. "Next time I will." "No need to tell me that." Juju found a couple cans of beef stew that didn't look like they had any weird ingredients like lemongrass or soy. "Just do it if you're gonna." Maybe there was some bread that hadn't passed, or instant rice. He was missing vegetables, truth be told, and that was a sure sign of the apocalypse, too. Spinach. Or some carrots. Well, maybe the carrots might still be good, even if the produce department was a little fragrant right now. Ginny had hied herself over there with a purposeful look when they separated to look for dinner. "I just wanted you to know." Mark's bare hands wrung at each other, red knuckles glaring. Wasn't enough to just say he was sorry. The kid expected Juju to soothe him, too. Maybe before the wrath of God came down on the whole world, Juju would have tried. "Well, thank you, Mr. Casbrick." Juju nodded, selecting a couple more cans. Might as well stock up. "You want some of this?" "No, sir." Mark's expression cleared. "I like tomato myself, with some grilled cheese." Well, there was a bisque right there. Why they didn't just call it plain old tomato was beyond Juju Thurgood. "Was thinking of finding some bread." He pointed vaguely down the aisle in the general direction of the bakery at the back. "If there's any that ain't gone over." Cheese might still be good. Maybe they could dig up some of that Velveeta. That shit never went bad. "Now go look." With that, the kid was off, his flashlight bobbing. They shouldn't split up further, but Juju didn't say a word. His left hand, hidden, had turned into a fist. Casbrick's conscience was relieved. That was nice for him. Real nice. All the weight slid right off him and onto Juju. They just didn't seem to get that next time didn't and would never do any fucking good. White people were gonna white people, and even the end of the world didn't change that. Still, the boy had made the effort. That was pretty much all you could expect, even now in the goddamn ruins of civilization. Why did they call it that? There was nothing civilized about the world. There was technology, sure, but manners and decency were another thing entirely, and rare all down through history as far as Juju could tell. Real rare. Juju sighed, shook out his left hand, and didn't look at the burn scar. It twinged, a reminder that he'd only known one goddamn unicorn in his life, and was lucky to have got as much, even if that creature was lying dead on a bed in Cotton Crossing with his head stove in. He grabbed a couple cans of the best-looking beef stew, hesitated, and got a carton of fancy tomato soup, too. Might as well. Rapture. In yet another grocery store manager's office, the desk and ergonomic chair pushed against the wall bearing a whiteboard full of retail hieroglyphics, Steph smoothed her sleeping bag over the foam pad. Her pillow was going to be cold, and it would smell like the back of Mr. Lee's truck. Still, it was better than being in a tent. "Hope tomorrow we get into another hotel," she said tentatively. "These floors aren't good. They hurt my back." "You're too young for back pain." Ms. Ginny smiled, a gentle expression. Her cheekbones stood out alarmingly, and in the soft candlelight in the manager's office, she looked like a religious statue, an icon, her hair freed from its usual braids and flowing in soft rippling waves. She drew a wooden brush through the long flow, wincing a little bit when she came across a slight tangle. "But I hear you. I was wishing up a salad earlier myself." "Ew." Steph couldn't help herself. Her face wrinkled up and Ginny laughed. It was a thin, tired sound. "Someday you might appreciate them. I found some carrots and a couple apples, but if we get back to growing lettuce commercially, I might not ever eat anything else." The older woman sighed, laid the brush aside, and began to braid, quick and deft. If she minded having to bunk with Steph instead of Lee tonight, it didn't show. Funny how it was decided, girls in one room, boys in another. If Steph was older, she could probably sleep next to Mark and nobody would mind.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?